Folks, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Life in the 2020s has not been easy. Is it the worst time in human history? Oh, far from it. But for the 21st century, we are starting to see things get darker and darker. There's more sadness, there's more depression, there's more discouragement, there's more uncertainty about the future. Things that we were told to do growing up haven't really panned out. Going to college, getting a good job, it hasn't really produced anything for people because the economy is so screwed up. The geopolitical situation is so out of whack. There's several different wars starting up. People are at their breaking points in different cultures and finally deciding they want to go to war. We've got all sorts of problems in the United States economic. We've got the border crisis, the economic crisis. We've got our government that seems in disarray. We've got a culture war that's ongoing and is being affected by multiple different things. It's just an endless parade of just dark, depressing nonsense. And it's so hard to be encouraged on a day-to-day basis for so many people. For all of the people who are willing to see the positives and have a smile every day, there's about 50 others who are just barely making it by. They don't want to be miserable. They don't want to treat people with contempt. But it's a side effect of just the sheer burden that is life. People just feel burdened by day-to-day activities. They're doing the best that they can, and it just doesn't feel like it's enough. They're doing everything they were told to do, but it still isn't enough. We're seeing families break down, friendships be destroyed. Social media is at the root cause of a lot of these problems, but so is the way the government is. It's not trustworthy anymore. A lot of people don't trust it. A lot of people don't even trust their neighbors. We're not building meaningful communities with people around us. We're just looking over our shoulder because we don't know who's going to accuse somebody of what. And worse yet is the kids. We're setting such poor examples for future generations of children. Now, I'm 31. I don't have any kids or any ambitions to have kids or get married. And that's not because I think the world is a horrible place and you shouldn't have kids and all of the other excuses that people come up with, some of which have some validity to them. I understand. It's not exactly the best climate to have kids, so I don't disagree with that. But mine is more of a personal understanding of my own limitations and the sheer responsibility and duty that I would have as a father that I don't know that I can fully carry out. So I don't want to commit to that if I don't know that I can fully commit to that, and I don't believe that I can. I know there's others who believe that I could, but I don't believe that myself. Until I believe that myself, I don't want to pursue it. So as for now, as I have been for many years, I remain single and just focused on my faith in the Lord, my career, and just going through life as God intends. But that aside, those who do have kids, they have a responsibility to them to give them the best future possible. And for many, they don't even try. Many, they just dump them in public schools and they just go through the motions. And then they wonder why their kids are depressed and anxious and all these things that kids should never, ever be, because they're kids. They're supposed to be innocent. They're supposed to be a time of learning and development, making mistakes and then learning through them, learning from them. They're not allowed to do that anymore. Now we just give them one of these and say, have fun. And while it's a great source of information, they can learn now. They can learn more now than they ever have. In most cases, they're not willing to learn anything. They just want to be endlessly entertained. School is an abject failure. It's not turning out kids who can read and write or have good arithmetic skills. All of those are down across the board in public systems, because the public system has failed them. I'm a big fan of home and private schooling because you can give your kids the tools to succeed, but not everybody has the resources to do it, so they're in a rut. That's a part of this 2020's mess. The economy is in the tank. I go to the grocery store. It's hard for me. I buy 7 items. It costs me $30. It's ridiculous. Everybody's going to need food stamps because the prices just keep going up and up, and the companies can't afford to really lower them because they got to pay their employees the increased wages that they have to pay their employees, along with all the other increased expenses. It feels like a nightmare scenario where things are cascading. Each subsequent year of the 2020s, things are getting worse and worse. We survived the lockdowns and all of that, but they did almost irreparable damage to our culture. On top of the culture war and the social climate being so awful. It's hard to even have a social life anymore. What does that look like? Just internet communication for most of us. For the past 15 years, most of my communication has been online with people. And I know I'm not alone in that. So what are the solutions? I'm not here to necessarily offer any airtight solutions. I don't know anybody who has 100% of solutions outside of God himself, which is to trust in him. But I know not everybody believes in him. I know to put my trust in him. So what are the solutions in terms of socially and all these other things? Well, socially, we need to be willing to put ourselves out there and build community. We need to be willing to get hurt in order to build something better. Too many people are far too afraid of what somebody else will say or do to them, and they're not putting themselves out there. They're just carving out an island in their own house or apartment or wherever they live. And they're just being like a hermit. I lived this way for many years. I still semi-live this way. Not because I want to, but because that's kind of that's my only option. There's not a lot of social outlets where I live. Especially at age 31. And that's the thing too, is many in my generation are getting older and they're taking on families. So social life is more difficult for people who have families and don't have families, and the intermixing of all of that. So it's become difficult. But we still need to try to build meaningful communities with one another. When I was growing up, we had that. I remember one year we had a big snowstorm in Rhode Island, and everybody with a shovel was out shoveling their driveway and trying to shovel in front of the road. My uncle had a snowblower, so he was going around doing his driveway, doing parts of the road and parts of our driveway. But we also had a neighbor down from my uncle who had a four-wheeler that had a big plow on it. And he was going around and helping people. It was a great help. Both my uncle and that man have since passed away. But those were the types of people that I grew up around. People who would be willing to take the resources that they had to help others in need. And I still see some of that in my own neighborhood. But there's a lot of places where people don't do that. They don't see that. You'll see random acts of kindness every day. And people try to emphasize them. But we need to go above and beyond with them in our own neighborhood. We need to get to know our neighbors and treat them like family. If you've got bad neighbors, that's one thing. You can deal with that. But if you've got just good neighbors that are trying to make it by, no matter what your differences are, you need to build community with them and be trustworthy with them. You're the closest thing many people have to family. A lot of people in their different situations are so far away from their families because of whatever circumstances. They need people around them. But the thing that scares me is that our culture is encouraging more isolation. It is encouraging people to be more single and isolated. People don't want to have kids. They don't want to have relationships. They're afraid of relationships because so many modern relationships have failed so spectacularly. The relationships between men and women have broken down worse than I have ever seen in my life. I don't know that there's ever been another period in history where relationships between men and women have broken down to the extent that they have in the 2020s. I am constantly hearing people say, I have no intention of dating. I've been burned too many times. I don't want to get married. I certainly don't want to have children. And it's not because they've done reflection and they feel like that's the life that they're called to have, but they're not against it happening organically. It's because they have such contempt for one half of humanity. They have so much contempt for the opposite sex. You see men going, oh, women are terrible. Women are money leeches. Women are this. Women are that. Because they've only ever dated and befriended bad women. And then you have women doing the exact same to men, and they've only ever dated and befriended bad men. When we all know there's good men and women, but people aren't looking for good men and women, and they're not looking in the right places. They're going to bars, they're going to clubs, they're getting drunk and hooking up. Then they wonder why people are so bad. And even if they're not doing that, they're still stumbling across people who have all sorts of red flags of being bad. And so they feel like it's impossible to find good people, because good people do tend to be more quiet and more reserved. So for good people, you need to get out there. You need to put yourself out there. You need to spread that goodness, because otherwise people are just going to keep being demoralized and discouraged. And they're not going to want to do life. They're just going to give up on life and lock themselves into a cave. That's becoming the default. People will say, well, I'm happy doing that. Well, it doesn't last, because we're social creatures. Eventually, you need positive social interaction. You need positive community to uplift you and for you to be able to uplift others. But that's been breaking down. over the course of several years. I would say it started in the 2010s, possibly earlier. Each subsequent decade of the 2000s has been worse than the last. It's been very difficult. It's difficult for a lot of people. It always bugs me. You see all of these channels telling people you need to smile, you need to be positive, you need to find the silver lining. All these social media influencers, a lot of whom are rich, a lot of whom are, for lack of a better term, privileged. Everything has gone right for them. It's like, who are they to talk? You can't be happy every day, just like you can't be miserable every day. Life is all about balance, but it's difficult for people because they've got several things wearing them down. A lot of their own poor choices, a lot of the different things that have happened to them that are outside of their control and circumstances outside of their control. A lot of difficulty. People are doing their best to overcome what they can. I'm not a big fan of how we celebrate victimhood in our culture. I think that's part of what's messing our kids up. We need to learn from what we are a victim of, and we need to become better. We need to be building ourselves up. As a Christian, I believe we need to be relying on God to do these things. But regardless, we can't keep celebrating and elevating victimhood, encouraging victimhood, because that's what's making people miserable. They think no matter what, I'm going to be a victim, so I should demand the world. Well, that's not fair. What about people who work hard and deserve things for working hard? They earn things. They're seeking to earn things in life through hard work, through honesty, through being a good person. They don't demand anything. They work hard. I was never in life taught to demand anything. I was always told that was childish. When I was a kid, I used to make demands, and I learned very quickly from my parents and from my red bottom that you don't demand what you don't deserve. At the end of the day, you don't just make demands. You have to work hard for things. You have to be honest. You have to be polite. You have to be respectful. You have to be a good person. It feels like only a handful of people are teaching their kids to be good people and then actually demonstrating it. You can't just teach that to kids or to other people. You have to show it. People can see through hypocrisy. You can't be a hypocrite. You have to be consistent. You have to be honest. You have to be straightforward. Otherwise, people are just going to hear what you're saying, but they're not going to see any meaningful examples, so they have nothing to go off of. My parents throughout my life demonstrated honesty from the day I was born. I saw it all the time. I was with my parents all the time, more than most other people. And I saw everything. I saw how they treated people. They were always generous and courteous. They were born in the 50s. They came from a generation where I think in the 60s it was split between all of the self-absorbed hippies and the people who were responsible and hardworking. And my parents were on the side of the people who were responsible and hardworking. And they've lived that way ever since. That's why I hate when people are like, oh, the boomers. Not all the boomers were terrible. A lot of them took after their parents who worked hard. The greatest generation, who I miss dearly, day after day. Boy, my grandfather, my uncle, they weren't perfect. They had problems. A lot of them struggled with alcoholism and were abusive, but a lot of them were hardworking, good, family-oriented people. They were some of the greatest grandparents who've ever lived. I miss them every day. And I want to honor their memory, and my parents' memory once they too go on. Because they demonstrated from a very young age, like I said before, they demonstrated things like generosity, opening your home to people, giving resources to people, being selfless as opposed to selfish. I was a selfish kid. I was a very selfish kid. I was very selfish mentality. I didn't want to share anything. I didn't want to do anything that I wanted to do, that I didn't want to do. I just wanted to stay at home, watch TV, play video games, just be selfish. Even with friends. I had to learn to be selfless. But a lot of people never learn. They're selfish from birth to death. It only works if you are intentional with your kids. You can't have other people teaching your kids how to be good human beings. You have to do that. So many people pawn their kids off to daycares and to grandparents and everybody else. No, you have to be the ones. Your parents taught you so that you can be the ones. And so many people have passed on that responsibility. So many of our problems are because we're not willing to do the good things that we were taught to do. Either because we think the people who taught us to do them are hypocrites, or because we're just selfish. It doesn't matter if they were hypocrites. Good advice is still good advice. You can either choose to live out that good advice like they didn't, or continue to be a selfish individual. And far too often people would rather be a selfish, self-absorbed individual that's just angry at the world. It's no way to live. It's no way to live. The only way that we're going to make our culture better beyond the 2020s is if we start getting intentional again. We start passing on and demonstrating good values to the next generation. We're not doing that right now. At least not the majority. There are handfuls of people who are working really hard to do that, and I commend them. I really commend them. But we need more. We need more intentional community. We need less culture war, less political and ideological division. We need more points of coming together. We need to stop embracing things that are divisive. There's too much divisiveness in our culture. We used to come together for things simple like fairs or lunch after church for people in Christian communities, and just even neighborhood events like garage sales and block parties and things like that. Just community events. People don't do that anymore because they don't know who their neighbors are. They don't want to know. They're scared. And everybody's scared of each other when nobody has anybody to... When everybody's scared of each other, yet nobody has anything to fear because the majority of people are good and honest, then there's a problem. It's just paranoia. And I'm not saying that that's the case in every neighborhood and every community. There are some reasons for people to be wary of some people. I'm not saying just completely let your guard down. I want to be very clear about that. But there are good people. And instead of constantly moving around, we need to firmly plant ourselves in communities that we can pass on to our kids when eventually we pass on, and that they can continue on traditions. Otherwise, we're going to keep birthing generations that have no sense of community. They'll always be lost and depressed and sad and barely making it through life. Look, I don't know what the future is going to bring. I know it'll bring natural disasters, it'll bring wars, it'll bring diseases, it'll bring economic downturns. We might see a second Great Depression. And these things are on everybody's mind, or most people's minds. But a lot of it is outside of our control. The best thing that we can do, have a good attitude, learn to pull away from the things that are dragging us down, whether that's social media, whether that's our job, the climate of our job, whether it's our living conditions, whether it's our own physical health. I'm working on losing weight. It's not easy, but I'm making a conscious, slow effort because I don't want to have an early grave if I can avoid it. I'm not afraid to die. I was in the beginning of the year, but God has given me peace about that. But I want to make sure that I'm strong and I'm capable for future job opportunities and for whatever else life has to throw, because we don't know what the future is going to hold. But I'm not going to be paranoid about tomorrow. The Bible says sufficient is each day for its own troubles. We got to live day by day. We're not meant to live years in the future and worry about years in the future. We just take life one day at a time. And we deal with problems as they come. We learn not to make a big deal out of the small things that go wrong. You know the old saying, don't cry over spilt milk? We're going to spill things. We're going to break things. Just clean it up. And just keep moving. We're going to have accidents. We're going to have things that are costly that we weren't expecting. Most places are understanding that it's going to take you time to pay certain things off. Just be diligent about doing it. One day at a time, one step at a time, but be intentional, be honest. Honesty is the best policy, and it's one that we've been throwing in the trash repeatedly year after year. So many people are dishonest because they're looking to try to get ahead, and they think that's how they're going to get ahead. It's not working for people. It's just creating more sadness, depression, and distrust. At the end of the day, the only way we're going to make it through the future is if we buckle down, we learn, we become better individually. We build communities with each other. We become better people. I'm not trying to be a self-help guru. Ultimately, as a Christ follower, I believe the solution to becoming a better person lies solely in Christ. I know not everybody agrees with that, and this is not a faith talk video. But it is my core. But if you don't believe that, then simple principles like honesty, generosity, just being a good, intentional person goes far. Makes you a trustworthy individual. Yes, people will take advantage of that because there are always going to be bad actors. Do not sit there in fear of them and have it keep you from going anywhere. I know if you've been burned many times, I've been burned many times. I chose to try to push myself away from community, to lock myself away rather. Doesn't help. I spent the past 15 years having only internet communications, and many of them went sour. And eventually I just gave up. But you can't give up. You have to be real and intentional, even if other people aren't. You have to build community. We are communal species. No man is an island. No woman is an island. Things will only get better as we get better. The world may not get better, but you and I can get better. Thank you very much for watching. This has been Super Koopa TV. I hope I've been able to encourage you at least somewhat, or give you the strength to keep going. Be sure to leave a comment down below. God bless. Have a good one. Peace.